Hello, friends, and welcome to our pilot episode of Reality Check. What is Reality Check? Well, we live in a time when our cultural reality is dominated by the ephemeral and the transient, but occasionally the transcendent still manages to break through. When does this happen, and why does it happen? We'll explore these and other questions about philosophy, culture, art, and politics with today's leaders, intellectuals, thinkers, and specialists, all centered around the idea of conserving the real in a time of deconstruction. So, one of the contemporary leaders that has a very interesting life story and that is interested in the reality of life rather than the illusions of wealth, and interested in the construction of independence rather than the deconstruction of every value, is with me here today. It's Michael Thomas. Thank you, Mike, for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much, Jan, for having me. I'm excited to be here and have a conversation with you.
Now, I had the great pleasure to meet you in person this summer in upstate New York. We were pressing apple cider together in your barn. You were very welcoming. You didn't know me, but my father-in-law brought me to you, and I experienced your project kind of firsthand. I saw the farm, I saw the orchard. You explained to me some of the know-how that you have accumulated over the years, and we've actually made a bunch of very delicious cider. So first of all, I should thank you again for that. So thanks.
Of course. I hope you're still enjoying some, pulling it out slowly throughout the winter out of your freezer. But you know, that was a great day, and it was great to spend the time with you, your wife, your family, your father-in-law. You know, it's a yearly event here, and there's quite a bit of magic and love that goes into those cider days. So that, you know, thank you for taking part. It was a great time.
If you make this an annual event, I will be back, and that's a threat.
You can count on it. I'm taking that as a promise.
Very good. Mike, flee to the fields. Is that the battle cry of our generation? And if it's not, should it be?
Right. It's a great question. Yeah. So Flee to the Fields, right, is the title of that was given from IHS Press to the Catholic Land Movement, a collection of Catholic Land Movement essays and letters republished, I think, about 15 years ago. It was reading Flee to the Fields that really inspired me and several others to begin the restoration effort of the Catholic Land Movement. And so, yes, you know, for me, the cry to our generation is to return a great restoration, or work a great restoration, and in that restoration, not just of our Catholic faith, of course, at the center of things, but a restoration of all things, and that return to realism that I think your program is speaking to. That realism is most immediately found in our connection and the communion that we make with our family, the soil, our faith. And so the Catholic Land Movement is a means, an organization or a framework or a vessel through which people are working, Catholic laity are working in developing those connections and teaching one another, lifting one another up, finding fellowship, much like the cider day that you experienced. Well, there's pig butchering day and somewhere else that's part of the land movement, or there's, you know, canning day with the wives, or firewood day, or whatever else it is. And this creates a type of seasonality laid over that liturgical calendar that's just a beautiful depth and connection to what is real, that strengthens, you know, our paths to virtue, that strengthens our Catholic faith, and really grounds itself in something perennial and true, and can be a great context in which to work that restoration of the real.
You're giving me so many keywords, I don't even know where to start. So let me start by just asking you, in one of your previous interviews, you actually explained how many people today are very scared. They're very scared of, you know, the shortage of supplies and just kind of the looming dangers that they get fed by the media on a day-to-day basis, you know, through all channels. Basically, you can hardly escape from it, even if you tried. And I was just wondering, you said, don't live out of fear, which obviously is also a book title by our dear colleague Rod Dreher. Don't live by fear. So the question is, if not out of fear of the current situation of crisis that many people see in culture, like, why should somebody join the Catholic Land Movement and join what you're doing? It seems like an awful lot of work and a kind of a very revolutionary way of looking at life. So, what would you say? Like, what's the best, I don't know, intention?
Well, oftentimes people come to me as being someone who cultivates in a leadership position with the Catholic Land Movement and who cultivates new members, kind of joining and getting involved and the formation of new chapters. Oftentimes, I come across an individual who's just completely motivated out of like, oh, my family's not going to have enough practically. I have to learn how to grow my food. I have to get animals. I have, the world's ending. I need the magic candles, and I need to know like what I need to do and everything else. And so and oftentimes this is an opportunity for me to tell that person, I feel like you're coming to me and all of your motivation is coming from fear. You're fearing of material lack, and in that you're missing what actually satisfies the yearning in your soul that you're feeling, which is a love and a deep communion and connection with the people and the world around you. So no matter how much material people accumulate, that lack isn't ever going to be relinquished in them. That fear isn't going to be relinquished until they actually connect with the source of love and motivate from there. And so part of what the Catholic Land Movement does is take people who are in this prepping mindset, we have to prep for the upcoming collapse, and turn them instead and say, hey, many of the things that you would do in prepping for collapse practically look quite a lot similar to what you would do if you were living in kind of ecstatic glorification of God in a very close and humble way to the soil. And so I attempt to flip them on their heads to say, all of these things that you're looking to motivate because you fear something, they're actually only satisfied if you connect with a motivation that arises from love and that deepest love, from God. If you can connect with that, then you'll find that all of these temporal things you're so concerned about will actually get satisfied. And that wellspring, that eternal well of Christ and God, that's going to carry you through the hardship that satisfying all those temporal things actually requires. You've already said, oh, it's a lot of work. And why do people want to do this? Well, if you just go at it with, I'm only doing this to satisfy my temporal needs, you'll find yourself exhausted eventually. You're just endlessly motivating out of fear. And so you need to find that deep well of love. And that love is, singing in harmony with creation, the glorification of God. And from there, your wellspring of energy is eternal. And you just can continue to cultivate in small steps a meaningful relationship with what's real around you. And all of a sudden it's that St. Francis, you're giving, you're not asking to take to satisfy your needs, but you're giving to satisfy your needs. And that's how community grows. That's how people become good stewards of the land. They understand that their part is sacrificial, their part is giving, and they connect with that and grow from there rather than, attempting to desperately satisfy some material or temporal need.
Well, it's having the hierarchy, having the right order of hierarchy, right? Is having the right thing on the top so that something lower will not take its place, right? Basically,
right?
Yeah, you don't want to turn your fear into God. You want to have God and God, and then the fear will be answered.
Exactly.
Very nice.
We see so many of these like homesteading groups and everything else, and they're all motivating from fear. They're all motivating from like, you got to get ready for the collapse.
Yeah,
and the Catholic Land Movement comes along and say, hey, we do all these same things, but we're motivating from love and a glorification of God. And we're utilizing humility as the pathway rather than some type of technical proficiency that allows me to do all the things I need for my material existence. No. We're asking you to humble yourself. And in that humility, finding a pathway that actually satisfies, not just your temporal needs, but your deep human spiritual needs as well, which are really the wellspring. That's really what people are trying to satisfy.
Now, in the danger of becoming a little bit too philosophical, I am the philosopher. So something that I found very, very beautiful about the movement is what I observe in just the kind of genealogy of modernity and the philosophy behind it is that nature was separated from God. And that's very complex how that happens. But nature was separated from God. And then nature just became this object for man to control ultimately, right? And to manipulate, to transform, to turn into everything that he wants it to be, and that eventually turned on man himself. Right now, we're in a situation where we think that we can transform us ourselves into anything that we would like to be. And I find this actually originates in a stance towards nature. And I'm more thinking about nature in the Aristotelian sense, so in the sense that, what makes things move, right? Their essence, their nature, their principle of movement. But I think it can actually also apply to actually just nature, like green stuff and, animals around us. And I find it very beautiful when I encountered you and what you're doing, and also reading about it a little bit, that you seem to really, that's where your reform seems to really root, is a new relation to nature, and at the same time then decoupling from all of the unnecessary dependencies that, well, we just have by being born into the society. Like, would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, you'll forgive my Latin translation, but something that sticks in my head all the time is from Aquinas, and that nature is perfected by the divine. And so this echoes in me quite a bit as I do the work I do with the Catholic Land Movement, in that I repeatedly see men orienting themselves and the sweat of their brow towards a close relationship with natural order. So when you're raising sheep and you're dealing with the cycle of gestation of a sheep and them eating the grass, and you're worried about the amount of rain to make sure the nutrient balance in the grass is correct for the sheep to carry it, right? There's this overplay of all these very, very real things, and a great order emerges. And so many people are disconnected from that order. And so by connecting deeply with that natural order, then that invitation of perfection actually becomes available. And I think so much of modernity is thinking that our interplay with the natural world is one in which we exercise our agency. It's completely concerned with our human agency and how we exercise it in nature. And so we just increase our technique and increase our technology to kind of command and control nature, instead of back to what I was saying before, this question, that humility. And that if we go to Augustine, right? If you wish to ascend, begin by descending. And so the humility to serve and find our place, our just prepared place within natural order, then we kind of align ourselves for that perfection from the divine. And so we've just been trying to, with our agency, kind of reorder everything, and in that we're blocking that perfection from actually descending upon us. And I've seen this happen with families over and over and over again. People begin to work in a garden, and all of a sudden their relationship and their contemplation and their mental prayer just like explode. It happened with me. My path back to Catholicism is really resultant of me just kind of working with the landscape, and all of a sudden I felt like praying. All of a sudden I wanted to chant, the prayers my grandma had taught me from a faith that I had been so estranged from for so many years. And so this happens again and again with people. And you find oftentimes rural people and farming people and people close to natural order, whether it's through the great humility of tragedies, or farming, or a life of poverty, invite that perfection because they've been humbled by natural order in a way that the technological agency of modernity kind of blocks us from. And so that's not to get too philosophical, but I think that there's a real powerful thing that's happening to people when they engage that transformation. And part of what my work with the Catholic Land Movement is kind of stewarding people on that process and on that road, and then inviting them into the deeper reality of the tradition, right? There's these perennial truths, but then there's the tradition. There's a lineage of the church that Christ gave us, the liturgy and all these other, the sacraments and all these things that are carried by the church, that then just that perfection becomes mind-bogglingly glorious. And so the Catholic Land Movement is like, yeah, you came here for potatoes, but have you ever considered Vespers? And so that's the work of the land movement, is to actually show people that these things are very, very related and very, very connected, and that it's not some obscure, esoteric, arcane thing that's forgotten. That no, this is a living, breathing movement that not just you or me are making, but that many people around the world, as the practicalities of modernity kind of disintegrate in front of our eyes, that many people around the world are being kind of stewarded to. And again, we meet you there. We say, stop being afraid, trust in your place in natural order, and join us in the glorification of God. And all of a sudden, like, this wellspring of activity is birthed, in individuals and communities, and in all these different Catholic land movement chapters, conferences, blah, 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 blah. It goes on and on and on. So,
beautiful.
That's the work of the movement.
Tell us a little bit about the idea behind it, because the movement does grow. It does have some actually quite interesting roots. So I'm thinking of Hilaire Belloc, but also Chesterton, who was actually involved, and then famous Dominican Vincent McNabb. So what was their involvement, and when did that actually start? You don't have to go like too broad, but just give us a couple of pointers here, historically, where this rooted and why it stopped, or why it had to be revived.
Right. No, that's great. The history of the land movement's a fascinating topic. And you mentioned McNabb. I'm gonna so the land movement arose from a desire from English distributists at the turn of the century, and we can get into distributist history next. But we can broaden the topics, and we have a limited amount of time. But the Catholic land movement, in its original manifest, was an answer to industrialism. So industrialism, much is I can drop so many things that we could just walk away on a thread of conversation on, but there was many responses to industrialism, right? Communism essentially is a response to industrialism. The World War I and the consolidation of power into nation states is can be contextualized as the industrial transition and a response to industrialism. So our modern republics are kind of a response to liberal economic policies, global liberal economic policies set the base for the industrial world. And there was a small group of English who actually said, communism isn't great. Unfettered capitalism isn't great. We're Catholic. There's another way to think about economy. There's another way to think about social life. There's another way to contextualize the negatives that we're experiencing from industrialism, and how do we resist those negatives? And this idea of well-distributed, productive property in the hands of families caught on, and it caught on because of the writings of Chesterton, Belloc, Pope Leo XIII, Pope Pius IX. There was quite a few of them that kind of wrote, and really, just as our previous conversation just moments ago was really getting at the roots of modernity and talking about the relationship between divinity and nature. These topics of how we wrestle with the problematic elements of industrialism echo all of those other conversations that those other conversations. So you have this group of people in the early 1900s who are experiencing a kind of reactionary, I know that's a pejorative most often, but I'm going to use it here as a somewhat neutral term, a reactionary of both philosophical and social movement towards the effects of industrialism. So how they kind of coherently addressed, how do we resist it? What would look better? How do we practically set forth strategic goals and tactics that make it happen? Mm-hmm. And do that, people got together, and one of the reactions was the Catholic land movement. And the Catholic land movement was English farmers getting together to do exactly what we're doing now. And Father Vincent McNabb says it really beautifully and succinctly, that he says, for us Catholics, the distributive state is not something which we discuss, but something that we have to propagate and institute. No advancing of social thought or social action is possible if we are seeking to prove to ourselves in theory what we should be trying to realize as fact. And so at the very early roots of the movement is Father Vincent McNabb barefoot in his white woolen Dominican habit, walking around, telling everybody cabbage, 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 right? We can't just be talking about the stuff. We must be proving in fruit, and in truth, that these ideas are possible. And what are those ideas? That well-distributed property, that's made productive and passed on from generation to generation is going to give us a good social order in which Catholic virtue can grow. Like right from the Catholic Catechism, the ownership of any property makes its holder a steward of providence, with the task of making it fruitful and communicating its benefits to others, but first of all, his family.
You mentioned, so Vincent McNabb basically called the distributists to action. And he did that from that Catholic perspective. So from kind of putting the money where their mouth is, or their handiwork where their mouth is. So what was his exact influence on the movement?
Right. So McNabb helped the initial formation, and through a series of writings. There was an existing Catholic community, the Ditchling community, which people may be familiar with, which was like an early Catholic utopian attempt at communal living. It was an English thing. It fairly disintegrated. Doesn't necessarily have exact ties with the land movement. I guess it does, but the land movement, in its organizational expression back 100 years ago, there was about 6 land associations. Those land associations would set up demonstration farms, and those demonstration farms would teach various workshops, how to do market pigs, how to plant corn, how to harvest grain, draft agriculture. They would teach what we would understand in the modern set as workshops, and what we would understand, they called them work stays, but what we would understand as internships. So you would go to one of these demonstration farms, you would learn a set of agricultural skills, and then you would take that to back to your parish community and kind of set up a homestead. And the Catholic land movement of the day would kind of rally around you to make you successful. And back then and now, the Catholic land movement is primarily concerned, as so much Catholic social teaching instructs, that our labor, that dignified labor, first and foremost should be pointed at the production of our primary things and not at a secondary wage with which to procure them. And so this idea, we would call this type of farming homesteading, subsistence. But it's an entirely different agricultural model from what we have in America. Corn subsidies in the service of markets in order to procure secondary wages to then get our primary things. The Catholic land movement was concerned about equipping fellows like me and you with the practical skill set to make our property productive and our primary things for our family first, and then to root our family in the landscape. I think it's I want to say it's Pius XI, but the family is most perfectly rooted in a productive holding. That's from memory, but I believe it's Pius XI.
But what's so interesting about this is that sense of independence, right? And that's something that's really attractive, I feel, because and this is where I think much of that fear generation comes actually from, is because people do realize how dependent they are on all of these things, dependencies that they entered themselves out of their own free will, but also dependencies that just come with society. And if anything, what you're trying to do really, and what you're doing, not just trying, but what you're accomplishing, is really this call to independence and to real freedom, starting with one's own independence from all of these preset, societal demands and products. So it sounds really attractive.
Yeah. Then there's a lot of work involved, and so one of the first things we learn as homesteaders, when you really set yourself on it, is, boy, I need more people. So there's like this beautiful network of other people trying to orient their labor and work towards, a virtuous arrangement for themselves and their family, find this natural synergy in the Catholic land movement where, hey, let's work together. I'll stack firewood at your house on Tuesday. You come do it at my house on Wednesday, and I'll come to your house and butcher a pig. And, we'll loosely call it all the Catholic land movement. One of the keys to the land movement's success is that we haven't rooted it in the type of like institutional professionalism that so many kind of nonprofits try and organize themselves by. So we don't have like an executive director with a salary and all that. We lean deeply into subsidiarity. Everybody's a volunteer. We set you up with a suite of tactics and a few strategic goals, and we come back in 3 months, and maybe you've met them, or maybe you haven't, and you need another pep talk, But the regional leaders kind of help that cultivation in families and in chapters and in parishes. And all of it is happening with like a more or less a zero budget. I mean, our conference expenses, eventually activity in chapters. So sorry, I should explain a bit. So it's all so common to me because I do it every day, but for the outsider listening. So the historic movement had land associations. Okay. And those land associations cultivated demonstration farms, and those demonstration farms trained Catholics to be productive on property they owned and actually facilitated the connection with that property. Mm-hmm. This farmer over here could sell you 2 acres. Let us help you make that happen. That was the initial land movement. The modern restoration land movement has parish chapters. Those parish chapters have workshops. You come, we'll talk about Leo the 13th and Rerum Novarum. Then we'll have a little pig butcher. We'll butcher a pig, and you'll get your hands dirty and be like, boy, I want to do this. And then those workshops will grow until there's enough activity in a region where we can establish leadership, and that leadership then plans a conference, which is usually a weekend long event where we immerse ourselves both in like religious get invited. We have daily office, daily mass, and then we also have a bunch of practical workshops, usually 20, 30 practical workshops, how to beekeep, how to make tallow from beef, how to butcher a chicken, how to plant a garden bed, whatever else. And so the conference, and then from that conference, everyone gets inspired. They go back out, inspire more chapters, inspire more workshops, and so on. And people make connections, and all of it's very kind of casual, natural, and pushes everyone into action. And that push into action is really where that principle of subsidiarity comes through. And we walk through, as far as the social movement goes, the leadership of the movement walks through principle cultivation in the leadership, the clear identification of strategic goals, a suite of tactics that points towards those goals, and action. And then from the action, we identify leaders and push them back towards principle cultivation and walk through it again. And through this very, very simple method that always results in that McNabb type of way, cabbage, 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 we must be proving it. We always get to the action point. So that's how we're cultivating this movement. And it doesn't take a budget. It doesn't take an executive board of directors. It doesn't take a nonprofit filing. We might have all those things. We do have a bank account. We do have budgets for our conferences and everything else. But the primary thing is that we're not stuck in some cycle of like fundraising to pay staff. We're actually pushing action out into families and people and parishes. And this method of organizing is incredibly fruitful. So there's regional leadership groups, in the Gulf states, in the Northeast, in the Midwest, on the West Coast, in Australia, on and on and on. I could go with all the different regional groups and chapters that have been seeded all over the world, and they're just growing. I might not talk to a chapter leader for like 6 months, but I come back and they're like, oh yeah, we had a reading group about, Rerum Novarum, and we built a chicken coop, and we're going to use those here. And so it's all very small, but back to Saint Teresa, right? Small acts with great love. And so the land movement very much leans into that idea. Just, always be acting, but then always be using that action to identify people who need to have a deeper cultivation of principles, and then move through that setting. And that's what a social movement is. And that's what
it's really beautiful. And I really do appreciate all of the name dropping as well, which is something that I usually do, but you're doing it for me, so I don't have to. So this is great. You're making this very easy for me.
Excellent.
No, what I really like about this is I always find, especially from a Catholic perspective or Catholic conservative perspective, even that we are often tied by the pre-established. Sorry to be a little bit technical here, but dialectics. And what you pointed out earlier, this idea that Marxism was a reaction to, the Industrial Revolution, and so was capitalism. And today, those are the two great forces that we really see at work. And it feels like the Catholic has to either kind of choose to become, the socially focused leftist, I guess, Catholic that then comes closer to the Marxist idea, or has to become the kind of conservative, old school, like old money kind of, capitalist Catholic, market supportive and all of that, but has to side with either of those. And I really find the truth in your movement to be, well, what I like to call the transcendent middle, not a gray zone in the middle, not a middle ground that takes a little bit of both, but actually a third option that precedes, I guess, and hopefully also transcendentally grounds both of the other versions because it's its own proper answer, and I really like that. Now,
Yeah.
I
Uh,
good.
uh, there's a great a collection of distributist writings called "The Third Way," which takes you from Chesterton's Outline of Sanity, Belloc's Restoration of Property, and back to Pope Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum, synthesizes them all in one volume, and they name it "The Third Way," which I think is to your point. There is like a contemporary intellectual movement. I'll name no names, but thinks that the synthesis of Catholic social teaching happens, or the contemporary enactment of Catholic social teaching best happens between a synthesis of the Marxist and they're all neoliberal, and I think we know who I'm talking about, and they believe that if we synthesize these points and invite both fields, but the distributists can very simply ground themselves in long-held Catholic teaching and say error has no rights. Error does not have a right. It's not something I need to negotiate. I just need to present the fruit of goodness, and so the fruit of the truth. And so I believe that the Catholic land movement, distributism, and that type of third option, as you've described it, is actually that I'm not negotiating between two polar sides. I'm actually just offering something completely not even tertiary to them, but separate from them, that comes from a completely different well. That is actually offering something sound. And when most people understand it, one of the most terrible things that modernity does is that it affects people's political and social imagination. They don't have, they get
Yep.
stuck in some type of political binary that always has to be negotiated and everything has to come down. It's kind of the guillotine wasn't the only thing that the guillotine falling on heads wasn't the only thing that happened at the establishment of these republics. The guillotine falling on people's ability to have imagination in the political realm of what's actually possible and how rapid actually humanity can reorganize itself around what's good when it's clearly presented to them. And so I do really feel like the Catholic land movement and the contemporary distributist cause, when it's well formed, can do that, and then but as everything, right, everything has a history. It's a complicated history, distributism included, and so there's quite a bit to be negotiated, but there is a small handful of us who are doing the work.
No, of course, but also, I mean, a historical movement like this, it was capsized by the war, and it really now reestablishing it is a completely new framework. So I wouldn't even say that the original problems may even affect the modern kind of
No, no,
refounding. But I
yeah,
mean that's all hypothesis, anyways. Again, I think that the fruits are visible, and that's what to focus on. I have a complicated question for you, though. Not a complicated question, but it's more of a difficult one to answer, I think. The question is relatively easy. I find that many of the kind of type, especially like within the Catholic world, that would see the culture crisis and the culture war and really kind of shying away from it, or I don't know, wanting to engage in it, but really fight for what they believe, um, they would equally criticize, though, much of the, or many of the, let's say, bad eggs in the church's hierarchy. Partially blaming them, fully blaming them, saying that, well, much of the, I don't know, the abuse scandals or all of these problems are actually initiated by the hierarchy, and that's an issue. That's something that we have to equally fight. So my question to you is this: from the text that I've read and from what you've already said, you seem to have a very close connection to the parish structure, also to the priests involved, and obviously to the spirituality, like of the millennia old tradition of the church. But like, how do you come to terms with the hierarchy? How do you? I guess my question is, how do you keep yourself from being infected with by the bad apples that are part of the hierarchy?
Oh, that's it. It's a great question. Actually, our last Indiana conference, we had a great presenter, a good friend of mine, John Sharp from IHS Press, who's responsible for a lot of the reprintings of the historic distributist texts that we know, gave a presentation in which he titled "The Two Swords." We remember Christ before the agony in the garden, right? He's presented with two swords, and he says, "This is enough." Many medieval scholars understood those two swords to be the balance between temporal and ecclesiastical authority. And so, what I think one of the problems with the church as a body is that the ecclesiastical authority has engaged, especially in the contemporary. I promised I wouldn't get controversial before I started, but here I am. As it does engage in a degree of clericalism. This is something that's been warned. And that clericalism takes the shape of the ecclesiastical straying from its mission of carrying the sacraments and the tradition of the liturgy and into the temporal order of things. And so the ecclesiastical sword should concern itself primarily with the preservation of the liturgy and primarily with the preservation of sacraments and then the carrying of those gifts that Christ gave us across time. That's a timeless mission. that's right. Until it's all concluded, those must be carried, and that is the ecclesiastical authority's mandate. Right. That's what they're here for, to give us the dogmas and the moral guidance, the sacraments, these things. The temporal sword of Christ, meaning that we have social structures and social order that guides people towards Christ, that turns our families and our communities towards an enactment of Catholic virtue. That is sorely lacking. Our temporal structures, our governments, our institutions, our fraternities have all been turned towards this idol of liberalism. The constitutionalists, the neoliberals, right? Something always other than the resolution of Christ is offered as like our say the contemporary the technologists, the AI singularity or I don't know, whatever it is, the robot farms or whatever it is that's going to save us, right? Our temporal order is not grounded in the truth of Christ, so that temporal sword is dull. And so, to answer your question, and it might seem like a ramble what I just said, but it's actually very, very succinct and clear, is that the Catholic land movement is a laity-based movement. And what it's concerned with is the seizure and the sharpening of that temporal sword. And that starts at the very bottom with productive property in the hands of fathers who are using that property to steward families and the guarantee of inheritance and fruitful life. All right, this is what created Western civilization, right? This line of property ownership, its disintegration and its ultimate disintegration in communism is what takes Western civilization apart, and descends us into barbarism. And so that sharpening of that temporal sword is what the land movement's all about. And so we might, engage in liturgy and lean on priests and other people in that ecclesiastical authority to say, hey, help us carry the sacraments. We invite that in. We invite that deep spiritual guidance, the dogmas of the church, into part of like the education of the Catholic land movement participant. But we also say that this is a laity-based movement, and its other sword is the restoration of property in long term and the restoration of the Catholic family by seizing direct kind of control and participation with the production of primary things. So you can't cancel me anymore because I say a Catholic dogma, because I grow potatoes and I own my land, and there's no way you're going to take this from me. And then from that base, a slow seizure of, in Father Fahey's language, the restoration of the kingship of Christ, in the social order, and that is really the ultimate goal. If you ask me what the ultimate goal of the Catholic land movement is, it's the restoration of the kingship of Christ in the temporal order. And then through that, having the ecclesiastical authority meet us with the other sword, and carrying us to that share in Christ's victory at the end. And so that's what the Catholic land movement is about. So I hope that answers your question without being too kind of esoteric, but it is really how I think about it.
No, I think it does make sense. And it comes together very clear, because the each realm has its own logic, and they have a mutual relationship, but they're somewhat also independent, and they are, obviously, right? So I mean, a priest working on the farm is obviously possible, but he's not then acting as a priest, he's working as a farmer, and
right, he's concerned with the temporal thing.
Exactly.
Right.
So now, I do have a question though, regarding this, the way that you describe it, and I'm also kind of now considering more the practical aspects of, well, I mean, in the United States, there's a lot of land, especially me living here in Great Britain. It's much more evident just how small everything is. From, I don't know, the parking spots to just the houses or the living spaces, general, which again, it makes it cozy in a sense, but it also makes it very small. And the idea of a large farm is, and like owning a lot of land, I guess, also historically, is just possible for an elect few. So my question is this: is the Catholic land movement a solution for society at large, or really just for an elect few?
Right. So the anybody part of the, I said, when people first come to me, one of the things I fight is fear.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the first things I fight. The other thing that I often fight is this idea that I need that someone needs this complete set of material conditions in order to righteously enact the dominion that God's given them. And so the Catholic land movement isn't about everybody, homesteading a piece of property all by themselves and providing all their needs. What it really is about is connecting individuals with whatever they have from where they are. So for me, Jan, I'm thinking about the next crop of apples I'm planting in for people 15 years from now, and how I'm going to graft them, and how I'm going to continue my breeding operation with my sheep to take wool out, and how I'm going to introduce geese next year to deal with their parasite load. And my understanding of like how I'm cultivating my property is advanced, and I have a certain material condition that as dictated, I have to kind of understand various techniques and things. But for you, a guy in England, there's maybe a different suite of techniques, a different suite of tactics that you're going to engage in, because you don't have a big farm, right? You might
like what?
Right. Your next step might be to establish gardens boxes at your parish, and so your parish gets together, and on a piece of land that is connected. I know that the English are the best gardeners in the world. I humble myself to this reality. And so perhaps there's the ability to create a garden at some parish-owned piece of property that could be a what do they call them in a home shares or something? I don't know. In England, there's a word for it, but what we call community gardens in America, and so establishing a community garden as a component of the parish life, of your Catholic community. That might be how the Catholic land movement manifests itself, with your suite of material conditions and meeting you where you are and with what you have, and asking you to kind of evaluate, take action, set up a set of tactics, have those tactics guided by a set of achievable strategic goals, and have those goals grounded in the principles of cultivating virtue through you as a Catholic connecting with the dominion that God gave you. And so that's what the land movement, when I meet you and you do your little consult with me at our first step, those are the questions I'm going to ask you. What do you have in your community? What skills can you connect with? What's the suite of needs? Maybe ask your priest, is there a need somewhere? Maybe there's some farmer who actually desperately needs a young family. How can your parish community rally around that family to get them on that land and help them transition a farm into the next generation? This is the work that the land movement does. And so each set is like, this is where the leadership familiarizing themselves with a vast diversity of tactics, and then kind of having some successes with strategic goals, whether they be conferences or workshops or mentorships or whatever. And then they develop their suite of tactics, and then they can go out in their community and enact them, and in their family enact them and take next steps. But it could look very, very different. I've coached people to set up seed trays on windowsills in apartments.
Well, you got to start somewhere, right? You may as well start
wherever it is. I'm here to help you take that next step.
The one issue, you're making this sound so easy. You're making this sound too easy. It's very tempting. You're making it sound way too easy, Mike. So listen, I want to bring it back, just also kind of before we close, to the theme, to the reality check, and I really want to ask you a more philosophical question. I don't know which way we can take this, probably many ways, but I feel that over the course of the last 200, 300 years probably, and then in different echelons, obviously in different countries in different ways, but we did lose somewhat our connection to the ground, to the earth, very simply, and to nature, as we've established in the beginning. And so I'm wondering, once that tie gets severed, what actually gets lost? And can you give us an example from a moment where you rediscovered it, maybe going back to that kind of reversion or conversion moment of yours? But what would you say? What gets lost and what can be rediscovered? Just to bring it back to the reality check.
Yeah. So I'm gonna read a quote that I love from Bishop Peter Bartholomew. So it's a little longer than the other quotes I've read, but I think it speaks to this question about what our condition of men is and how a reconnection of the land actually what it means in our life. So out of the land, the body of man was fashioned, and on it man depends for his continued existence in this world. The land is basic to all material activities of men. Through the land, man is best able to work up to the fullest development of his nature as created by God. On the land, man is closest to God's creation and should therefore, with greater faculty, work out his soul's salvation. At the end of his life, the body of man again returns and becomes identified with the land. And so this connection, Christ puts communion as the Eucharist, his presence, his very, very presence, at the center of the sacramental life of the Catholic. And what's communion? It's a meal. What's a meal? A meal is that point at which I become other and other becomes me. And there's a whole work around a meal. There's we all the things that go into a meal. Take one step away from the table and you get the cooks, and one step further and you get the farmers, right? And so Christ centers himself in this very, 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 very kind of temporal reality. And then over and over again through the sacrament of the Eucharist reminds us every Sunday, or every day, every Mass, that's the point through in the world through which he's coming. And so this is highly instructive to me. This was like a linchpin in my mind when I was like working and thinking a lot, about my fields, about, the sweat of my brow and how that interacted with the landscape and how the sheep ate the grass and my making the hay and I ate the sheep and I became the sheep and I became the grass and the hay. And all of a sudden it was all kind of this one beautiful communion and harmony. And I had a part to play in that harmony. And then that Christ, sets himself at the middle of a meal. This all kind of clicked for me, and perhaps people who are listening, it clicks for them as well. But there's something very, 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 very important about communion and how we make communion, both in the Eucharistic sense and in the more temporal sense of our bodies and our primary things and so that quote from that bishop right there is just reminding you, memento mori, you return to the earth, you come from the earth, your salvation is worked through the earth. It is not unescapable. And, to bridge the gap from tradition to contemporary, the Pope's recent encyclical Laudato Si, it speaks very closely to these themes. And so there's this union, right? Catholic social teaching, the parts that we can be confident are correct are the ones that echo without conflict across, both all sides, and when we see that echo across time, we can say, oh, this is really shining for me to listen to. And so that idea of communion, our responsibility to it, a righteous actment of our dominion through love and glorification of God, that's our calling as Catholics. And I think the Catholic Land movement has a part to play in equipping Catholics with practical skills in the cultivation of primary things, and also using that or contextualizing that in the carrying of traditional liturgy, traditional dogmas, to helping them keep and retain the deposit of faith through the church. That's what the land movement's about. And so for me, it clicked for me at one point when I was sitting on my land, thinking about me eating sheep and the oak tree and the grass and Christ's sacrifice and communion at the center of our sacraments. Like, bam! I was like, wow, I'm Catholic. And I couldn't, Christ is real. This all works not because it's some clever social instrument, but it all works because it's true and it's beautiful and it's miraculous. And so that returned me to the faith of my ancestors, so that's my answer.
No better closing words than those. So don't really have anything to add other than, I'm really looking forward to our next apple cider pressing session. So.
So am I, Jan. That's great. I'm looking forward to it.
Mike, thank you so much for your time. This was great. Very, very enlightening. And hopefully we'll have you again on the show as well. But all the best to you. Also from all of our listeners and our audience. So wish you the very best, and I hope to see you soon.